Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. I am Nick Kinoki, the Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I am very excited for today's program, Value and Benefits from Asset Management with Electric Utilities. I'm going to introduce ALN Executive Director Mike Bordenero to do some more introduction. Just before I do, I want to say that if you're out there watching, we would love to hear from you. So please send any comments, questions, or feedback to the chat. Or you can use the Q&A function of this Zoom webinar. We will be paying close attention, and especially once the discussion gets going, put your questions to our panelists. So with that, Mike Bordenero.
Hello, thank you, Nick. And I also like to thank our facilitator, Sally Nugent and Peter Kohler. Three of us cooked up this concept of value and benefits from asset management as a web series, so that we could collect information in a standardized presentation format that could later be added to a database and start collecting the owner's perspectives on their success stories from asset management. Let other owners realize that taking an asset management journey is a very worthwhile activity. And as Nick said, this program, our fourth one, is featuring electric utilities, and the next slide shows the presenters. First, we're going to have Stacy Webster-Wharton, who is the acting asset manager at Bonneville Power Administration. She has oodles of federal government experience and was a Director of Operations at William and Clark College, and she was also in the Peace Corps for a couple of years, which I think will provide interesting understanding and appreciation for asset management. And Glenn Schumacher is usually known as Shuey, but we've got his full name here. He's currently head of engineering at Energy Australia and has been involved in the largest thermal power station in Queensland, renewing the operation and maintenance performance there, and was the Queensland Professional Engineer of the Year in 2010. So we've got some very high-level speakers for today's program. And we'll go straight into Stacy's presentation. There's a little bit more about Stacy, and Stacy, if you would like to come on.
Yeah. Okay. Can everybody see me now and hear me?
Yes.
All right. Fabulous. Hi. Yes, I'm Stacy Webster-Wharton. Thank you for the introduction, Mike, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm honored to be presenting today. Thank you to the AM Council and the Asset Leadership Network for this invitation. I've already had a little bit of an introduction, so I won't spend too much more time on this. I do work for the Bonneville Power Administration as the acting chief data officer and acting asset manager. I have not been with the BPA for very long, but I do have several years of experience, including with the federal government, including being a Peace Corps volunteer and worked in higher education. Let's go on to the next one. Let's go on to the next slide. A little bit about the BPA before I jump into our activity that we're working on with asset management. The Bonneville Power Administration is a federal agency. We are authorized by Congress to market power and distribute power that is generated at one nuclear plant and 31 hydroelectric dams that are owned and operated by other partner agencies, federal agencies, the Bureau of Reclamation and the Corps of Engineers. Those dams are within Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana. We are a cost-based entity. We do not own the dams. We just market the power and the electricity from that. And we also do own, though, our transmission services. So we're a cost-based electricity and service provider that benefits the Pacific Northwest. And we market to over 125 publicly owned and cooperatively owned utilities in the region. We market power from carbon-free sources, which supports the various states' requirements and goals for carbon-free emissions. We also own and operate, and I'll talk about it in just a second, one of the nation's largest high voltage transmission systems. BPA started working in the asset arena some years ago with PAS 55 and through the first development of the ISO 55000. In 2018, we decided to take another stretch in our area of improvement and maturation in asset management by diving into the Institute of Asset Management, the IAM framework. Next slide, please. A little bit more about the BPA. We own 15,000 miles, more than that, of transmission lines, high voltage power lines. We provide electricity of 28% of the power within the Pacific Northwest, almost a third, about 3 million people. And as I mentioned before, 31 hydroelectric dams. Great. Next. So our project, our activity, we are working on, or we are just completing now, our strategic asset management plans, our SAMPs. Our SAMPs are done are refreshed every 2 years. These are 10-year plans that are looking sometimes at more of 3 to 5 years, but it looks out 10 years. And we refresh them every 2 years. We take that information that we have from the SAMPs, where we look at the risk, the safety, the compliance, the environment, financial reliability risks, for example, and we translate that into high-level plan that then feeds into our annual tactical plans that are done for budget forecasts, for start of year budgets and such. Next slide. The ultimate goal in this is, I will say, is to improve the processes for making data-driven decisions that are from strategic planning to maximize asset value and prioritize investments based upon risk, compliance, as I mentioned, risk, compliance, financial, and reliability. All of this is important and part of what we do with our SAMPs. Our SAMPs are all in alignment and tied to our agency asset management policies, which are then tied higher up to our strategic plans. It's important that we have an alignment throughout the organization on this, and then ultimately the SAMPs feed in to the asset plans. We all do all of this using the concepts and processes as outlined in the IAM framework, with such as the ISO 55000 and the ISO methodologies like the 31000 for risk. Next, and this version we're in SAMP version 3. So as we went into and approached our SAMPs this year in 2022, some of the key challenges for our project activity: strategic thinking versus tactical, long-term planning and objectives, thinking strategically. IAM maturity enhancement processes, CHR, which I'll dive into a little bit later on more. Optimization, reliability, asset performance objectives, and tying them to key and quantitative items. Tying the plans and to the initiatives that also then tie to the strategic plans. What are the alignment of the initiatives? How do they align to the plan, the risk, the cost, resiliency of providing power? How does can this be fed into the asset plans effectively? Not copied and pasted, but tied in, because they're two different plans. One is strategic, one is tactical. And integrating from a holistic standpoint, not just our agency strategy and planning, but our business practices and our technology. Next. So this is looking at some of our other key challenges, part of what I talked about before. There are four. This visual graphic shows some key aspects: criticality, health, and risk, for example, in the upper left-hand corner. understanding the risk of the assets, understanding the criticality, understanding the health, really diving into those areas so that we can make the right decision along the lines. Thank you very much for that feedback about the graphics. Appreciate that. Financial effectiveness. Focus on the process and the policies that influence the life cycle cost and the cost of delivery. Then you got reliability engineering, a systematic application, looking out through the life cycle to ensure that we perform the required functions under a given condition or given conditions and in a time interval. And then finally, life cycle decision support, an analysis of the cost of the entire life cycle to acquire it, to maintain it, to operate the asset, so we can get the best value for the money. These are all critical items that go into the thinking and the strategic planning part of our SAMP, so that we can ultimately, like we like to say, find the right project at the right time for the right cost. Next. So an outline of our project, of our activity of completing our SAMPs. First, we start off as every time we get done with a refresh, we take a look at our templates. The corporate group, which is I lead, it has a template. And every year we take a look, or every 2 years on the refresh, we take a look beforehand. And we ask the business lines, what do we need to do improvements? We ask risk management, enterprise architecture, security, resiliencies, the executives. We work together to make improvements so that we're always moving ourselves forward. And we had this year's SAMP is version 3. We started our first version in 2018. We're on version 3 now, and we are working on version 4 because we want to continuously improve to reach our goals. So we modified the template and we provided it to the asset categories. Now we don't do just one SAMP for all of BPA. We're an organization that we believe that the complexities of it and the challenges are rather unique that we do 7 of them. One for the following business lines, as you can see on the slide: federal hydropower. Those are the dams. So producing of the power. We work with our cooperating partners, the Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamations, together in partnership to work on asset management. Environmental, fish and wildlife, hatcheries, which we don't own, and land, some fish screens that are associated with the dams themselves. Transmission, which we do own, our transmission lines inside our substation, inside the fence or outside of the fence along the transmission line. Security, which is a brand new asset category we just added this year. Yay. We're always looking for improvements along the way. They just were added. Fleet, which is owned and leased vehicles and equipment, heavy equipment. IT, hardware and software. And facilities. Now you can probably already gather, or more, maybe you already read, that we've adapted the definition, IM definition of assets, to include items or things, hardware or software, whether or not we own the asset or not, that provide value to the customers and stakeholders. So we've adapted a little bit. So these asset categories work together on their plans with an interdisciplinary team to seek feedback throughout the organization for those high-level strategic objectives and decisions. They also work across their business lines where applicable. They work also with risk, finance, my organization, to work together to make the best plan possible. We provide them reviews and feedback and input. We also have implemented a peer review. One asset category will review another asset category SAMP to give them feedback, to learn, this increase understanding and educates each area and allows them to see other asset groups from a different perspective. The final plan is reviewed by executives, and the finance committee ultimately gives approval for the finance aspects of it. We're through that stage right now. We're in we actually just finished tying up all the loose ends, the dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and we're getting ready to upload that as communication to the public via the IPR 24 process, the integrated plan review process, probably this summer. I think it's in June, but sometime. So we're working through that. So we have completed that process with our SAMs. Okay, next slide, Mike. Measurable value that we get from this. What do we get from the asset management plans? Well, the big thing is we get a disciplined, common approach, a common template for documenting the long-term range across the different business areas of the organization. We get them to look strategically and think about SWOTs, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, stakeholder concerns, etc. It is also a good record of maturation and development within each area. This plan gives an opportunity for executives to communicate with executives so they can understand issues, concerns, and priorities. And it is a vehicle for tying together the business processes and technologies, looking at long-term maximizing value for the dollar spent. For example, in hydropower, they use a great analytical application to optimize and prioritize projects when they do their asset plans. In their strategic plans, they look at a higher level view of that and work together cooperatively with the Bureau of Reclamation and the Corps of Engineers. We're continuously through our process looking at expanding and adding equipment into our CHR evaluations so that we can prioritize the right project at the right time at the right cost. Some tidbits of what we have, some measurable values, is that we have over 10,000 pieces of equipment that are part of the asset evaluation process within hydropower. Over 17,500 asset systems spread across 1,000 buildings and facilities, and around 260 substation assets within the organization evaluated. Next slide. Lessons learned. There are always lessons learned. It's continuously an improving process. One of the most valuable lessons is communication. Communication on all levels, across the levels, within the organization, outside of the asset categories to other asset categories. Communication is key. This is a marathon, not a sprint, for asset management. To transition the thought process from managing assets to true strategic asset management, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes endurance. Maturation is not just a pure numbers game. Sometimes there are good, solid improvements that don't show up when you look at the 39 areas and dive into the maturation overall, but you can see that there's improvements and we're getting through them. The speed of the maturation and those improvements is very dependent on management support and prioritization. Multiple priorities, multiple challenges. Prioritizing asset management is imperative. Data quality and storage locations. How many applications do people have to have the data about assets is very much a player in the success of maturation and understanding assets. Business process alignment is critical. Knowing your business processes and understanding them and the effectiveness of them is key also. It's from a holistic standpoint. And did I mention communication? And then add some more communication on top of that. Next slide. One of the things that I would like to spend just a little bit more time on a lesson learned, and I've talked about it a little bit already, strategic versus tactical. Strategic objective setting and its alignment with tactics is not an inherent skill. We've learned that along the way. More training is needed. Next slide. This graphic shows a little bit more about what we're going to be diving into to explain the difference between strategic versus tactical. Strategic being the intent, the high level look at something, the direction, the high level direction, the high level goals and objectives, and alignment with the goals and objectives. Tactical is putting the intent into action. What are we going to do? What must be done? The steps it takes. The inward view of it versus the outward view of a strategy, a strategic look. So this is very important, and we're going to be diving in and doing some more training in this area, more communication in this area, more communication and conversations as we get to and look towards our next refresh in 2024. So this is a little bit about our activities related to our SAMs that we do. Our 10-year looks that we look at and we look to refresh, to revitalize and refresh every 2 years. Some of the big keys is that this is a marathon in asset. Asset management is a marathon. It is not a sprint. And we are making improvements so that we can make the right and determination for optimization and prioritization for the right project at the right time for the right cost. So that's my presentation for today. I really appreciate being here, and I'm open for questions.
Well, Stacy, that was really good and opens up a lot of questions. We've got a couple from work to clerk, but before we get to his, I liked how you set this strategy and tactics up earlier on by showing the alignment, that everything's driven first by the organizational objectives, and then you have to have the strategy for doing that. So, and then eventually that leads to your strategic asset management plans. And I also love the fact that you are one of our first guests who has inherited a legacy of asset management before you came in. Usually we're talking to the people who started the process. Nick, you can stop sharing now. So we know that Bonneville has been into asset management since past 55, that was part of the culture, was to look at ways to improve it. And the fact that this is your third iteration. So what was it like coming into an organization that had perhaps defined roles and responsibilities for you? And how did you build off of that?
Yeah, thank you. You know, it was great to come in an organization that had this foundation started. A lot of work that had been done previously by a lot of different people over the years. And I still have a great person that I work with, Victoria Duvall, that has been instrumental in education and training and just communication along the way. How we're building on it, we're looking at it from a bit of a holistic perspective of tying in the business processes, the data and asset management and IT together. And really, because I am also the chief data officer. So yeah, it just is inherent with what I do. And it is such an important part of asset management. I mean, think about your organizations, your different organizations, for those out there. Do you have all your data information in one application that you can take? No, I doubt that you do. Now you take an organization that has 7 different asset category areas. You can imagine how many asset applications we have. You might want to multiply that by a couple, and that might be really the number. It's a lot. And it makes it challenging to bring all that together. And so we're really working on some improvements. We've started with enterprise architect and our IT group, and we've made a enterprise asset management group. They actually made that before I started. They set it up with the ideas and the theories, but I get to be part of digging into the charter for it and starting up our first new project with it and really bringing things together. And I think we're going to make some really great progress in improvements of how we gather the data, because that's really, I think that's really the next hurdle to get through, is making it easier on ourselves a little bit, you know?
That is so good to hear.
Yeah, it takes a lot of work to do that. That's for sure. It's gonna take some work, but ultimately we can make it easier on ourselves.
Well, Mark DeClercq mentions the collaboration that you do, and wonders about the 7 separate SAMPs and overcoming the infrastructure plan that encompasses the 7 SAMPs.
Yeah.
And then you even mentioned you're open to adding more as you refine and improve. So
Yeah, you know, it's a fine balance along the way. They are so different, particularly our transmission and our power. They're so separated legally for various legal reasons. And so they inherently need to be different, and they also need to work together along the way. So one of the things that we have on our next revision is collaboration and partnerships, more of conversations within your organization and across the organization. For example, transmission, when they do something in a substation, it ties to security, it ties to facilities, and that collaboration, that communication is key. And that is a challenge, an inherent challenge when they're separated, that we need to continuously, that's why the communication is important. And then we all go to the same strategic plan and we talk about it. And that's part of what our job is in asset management corporate, is to as we read through these and help and assist, is to say, oh, hey, are you talking to each other? Do we have this tie together? And how do we make improvements in this area?
So then Mark wonders if the ROI is demonstrated when presenting on capital investments to your board or stakeholders. Is there, how do you address that?
You know, it's something that we're continuously improving on, so that we can get actuals, so that we know what we're getting and what we're paying for along the way. It's been really tough right now in particular. I'm sure you all have seen it with the pandemic going on and supply chain issues, really getting that ROI that we need, because that right price was the right price a couple of years ago, but that was before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And suddenly prices are different, and it's just been complicated along the way. And that's one of the things, you know, that Fed Hydro Group, the power group, they continuously look at reoptimization as the project goes along and have those discussions so that they make the right decision. And sometimes the right decision is still continue on. Oftentimes it is. Just they're just aware of the cost increases along the way. So.
Well, Mark seems to be happy with your answer, so thank you. And I know that you have to head off, so I want to give you time to take a breath before you jump into your next event. But I do want to say thank you very much. This has been very informative. We appreciate your contributions to the increasing database of knowledge about values and benefits from asset management.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate being here, and everyone have a great rest of your day. Yeah, I do need to run. Sorry about that.
No.
Got to go to a capital discussion about an asset. So.
Well, thank you for taking time with us.
All right. Have a good day.
All right. Now we'll bring on Sally Nugent to give a little bit more personal description and introduction to her buddy, Glenn Schumacher. Macher or Maker?
Schumacher.
Macher.
Hi, Glenn. Thanks, Mike. Hi, Glenn, if you'd like to join us. And I'd very much like to welcome Shui to this presentation. He has got a wealth of experience in asset management. I don't even know how long it started back. Was it before you were at Gladstone?
Yeah. Oh, yes. This, the mid-90s, and the current system we're in here at Energy Australia is my 7th asset management system build.
Yeah, so wealth of experience, and thank you so much for joining us and sharing a little bit of that. So I think we'll delve straight into your presentation. Nick, if you'd start the presentation, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Well, good evening, folks in the US. It's about 7:30 on Tuesday morning here in Melbourne, Australia. Just a quick bit of background, as we just mentioned in the discussion with Sally. I'm the current head of engineering with a company called Energy Australia, based in Melbourne, the capital city of the state of Victoria in southeastern Australia. We're one of the 3 large vertically integrated generators, traders, and retailers of energy in the east of Australia, which is where the bulk of the population is. So the whole east coast and part of the centre of Australia is in one energy network called the National Electricity Market, and it's got a partner of a gas market. So we generate, we trade, and we retail. We do not do transmission or distribution. By law, they are separated from the generating and trading assets. So we're a generator, whole broad spectrum of technologies, including thermal. We're mainly a thermal generator. So we have coal plants and gas plants and so on. My lineage goes back, my pedigree goes back all the way back into the mid-90s when we started off with PAS 55, trying to implement that and understand it. And along the way, we've made some horrendous mistakes, got things really wrong. Hopefully we've learned, because now we're getting things really right. But it is something one has to be very dutiful about, making sure that we are delivering real value from asset management. And it was interesting from Stacy's presentation, which we've just heard, the connection with strategic and tactical. One of the challenges we've seen is when corporations have had strategies which have been well thought through and processed and so on, but their plants have not been able to deliver. And so that connection with the tactics, in my experience, often brings undone where asset management is trying to go. Let me be quite upfront. I think asset management is an amazingly strong management tool, and I've learned that by experience over many years. It is not something that is a project. You don't do it once. Again, as Stacy said, this is ongoing, evergreen, and you're in a marathon race here. So you've got to keep at this. It's not just the latest fad from corporate head office, and that's a bit of a challenge in making sure that our boards and CEOs and presidents and so on, senior executives, understand that it's just not a one-off thing. Sally made reference to, or somebody earlier on made reference to a power station in the state of Queensland here in Australia, north coast of Australia. That power station was a large thermal power station, actually partly owned by an American company, NRG Energy Inc., out of Princeton, New Jersey. Spent a lot of time in Princeton over the years. And this large thermal power station was in significant distress. So on the screen, you can see a chart. The details of what makes up the chart are irrelevant, except it shows the availability of the plant. So this plant is contracted on an availability. It's got to be available when there is a demand for its output. So it's not driven by generation, it's driven by being available and able to respond to the market. So availability is the critical business metric, and it reflects the plant's reliability, so that when you push the button in the plant, the piece of machinery responds appropriately, is the bottom line. And this plant was in distress. You can see the death spiral with that availability curve just dropping through the floor. And it reached, the bottom red line is a business critical level where the business, not only the plant was in trouble, but the business was in trouble, and significantly so. I was appointed the head of that plant as the general manager in 2007. You can see that corresponding on the graph. And when I took a close look at that plant, it was just so obvious to me that one of the critical things we needed to do was introduce asset management. And we did that. We did that in a really successful way. And that's shown by the graph. You can see the recovery in that plant through its availability. That's a reflection of its change in reliability, but more importantly, it's the engagement of the people in that plant, which really helped change these things. So asset management has got, if it's done correctly, much more ramifications than a set of data and a set of plans and so on. And in fact, if that's what you end up with is just a set of plans, it's really not making the changes that it can do and not delivering you the value. If you're interested in this story, a book by Hardwick and Sally and others is well worth reading. And this particular plant is in there as a case study, chapter 8. And I recommend that book to you if you're interested in asset management, and you can read the details of that particular instance. We won an award, but that's an interesting reflection on the value and importance of asset management, and really showed that you can make a success. You can change the reality, and changing the tactics and what we were doing then reflected back into us allowing to set a strategy for that plant going forward. Next slide, thanks. So the kinds of things that, it's a bit hand in glove. What comes first? Cultural change, system change, what really works? And they really live together. One of the critical things that I've discovered over all those years of asset management is about engagement with our people, because they've got the knowledge and the experience out there in the various assets. Doesn't matter whether it's a power station or a paper and pulp mill, a cement works, a railway, an airport, a water distribution system. And one of the critical things that we found in this case study was when I arrived, people didn't believe they could improve the plant. They were accepting the decline as that was just how it was. They didn't see they had the power to change that. Now, one person sitting in the corner office in the administration building can't change this. You need everybody. You need to empower them and bring them on the journey, but also to leverage off their knowledge and experience and their ability to get things done. So one of the great things at Gladstone, which really changed that business and was noted in the award that we won, was the culture. We can do it. And that's people having ownership about not only the plant, but the decision-making and the processes and how to improve. And that really helped drive a level of improved management across the plant. So, sometimes you need a bit of that bottom up to help drive those who are leading the business to perform beyond what they might necessarily thought they could do. But one of the great things at Gladstone that just really was empowering to me in an odd way was all of a sudden I saw people solving problems that had been there for many, many years. And some of the solutions just amazed me. It was an adrenaline rush to see how people were solving problems that they'd accepted as being status quo. But once we unlocked their ability, it just really took off. And we created an environment, those people were empowered, and we saw people all over the operation, from the shop floor through to myself, raising our capability, pushing our envelope and achieving more. And it was an amazing 6 years. And we ended up with a much more knowledgeable and capable team. They knew their plant well, they knew how it performed, they knew how to handle issues, they knew how to get the best out of the plant, how to spend the money in the right place for the best bang for the buck. And they really drove change in that. And as a result, the business went from being nearly business ending to being world-class performing. And we started to receive a lot of visitors from around the world who wanted to know how you did this in a 32-year-old plant. Yeah, it was an aged plant. And so turning that around in itself was a major step. Next slide, please. So I still find value in going back to the roots of asset management. As I said, we applied PAS 55, and I still believe PAS 55 is the most powerful tool in the asset management world. I know I'm a bit of a outlier in terms of thinking about ISO 55000, but PAS 55 made sense to me. I'm a rather simple individual, and it made sense to my people. And when I needed to bring a whole organization on that journey very, very quickly, because that death spiral in that plant was really accelerating, I needed things that were simple, clear, easily understood, and applicable. And PAS 55 did that. And I go back to Woodhouse's definition, and it ties in a little bit with what Stacy was talking about, and that is we're talking about the whole life. So we're talking about the strategy, but we're also talking about that tactical issues. What do we do out there every day? And asset management can drive that. So how we operate the plant, how we might engineer the plant, how we maintain the plant, how we might replace the plant or end the plant's life. So by its mere nature, it's a strategic tool. Where the gap seems to occur is when we lose that connection with the doing every day. And thinking about that in a plan, do, check, act cycle. You know, this is a closed loop. It's just not open-ended. And one of our young engineers at that power plant came up with this amazing saying, so I can't claim this. He said, really what you're talking about is we want to manage the machines shouldn't manage us. And I thought that was a classic way of describing what we were trying to do at the plant level. Next slide, please. So again, as I've said, PAS 55, and I still have copies on my bookshelf. I often refer to it. I use it. Our asset management team here at Energy Australia probably is sick of hearing me talk about it and produce diagrams out of it. And I still think this is one of the most powerful management things that I've come across in my career. And I'm unashamedly am a fan of this and still so. Next slide, please. As I said at the beginning, I'm a very strong believer in asset management, and I've championed it not only here at Energy Australia, but I was the previous chief engineer for Australia's largest generating company, where we introduced asset management and drove a lot of change. But we must make it real. And I'm going to take you through an example where there was a disconnect between, and I'll leverage off Stacy's presentation, between the strategy and what was reflected in the asset management system and the reality, the tactics of what was going on in the plant. Next slide, please. So this is when asset management goes wrong, perhaps is not the right term, but there's a disconnect in asset management. Next slide, please. We had here in Energy Australia all of the things that you would expect to see if you did a ISO 55000 review. We had policies, we had life management plans, we have SAMPs, we have all of these kinds of things, and they're in place. Not totally across the whole portfolio, but in the plant we're talking about, yes, they were in place and well designed. Ironically, there was a review of our asset management system by an independent party, and they said, yes, this looks good. It's correct. However, there was an underlying problem. Next slide, please. So but we seem to have lost part of this slide. So I'm going to talk about a particular failure. I'm sorry, the formatting's gone wrong on my version. A failure of a piece of equipment. There are 32 pieces of equipment. We're talking about a particular plant. There are 32 of these pieces of equipment in this plant. Their purpose is not so important. They're pieces of rotating equipment. If you can see the brown ring, it's got a black arrow pointing at it there in the background. That's the key component. The large object in the front closes up against that, and that ring you can see has a mass of 23 metric tons, diameter of about, I should have converted this to feet, but 3.6 meters. And it's rotating at around 500 revs per minute and up to 550 degrees C. It's a very wet environment, and there's about 100 tons, metric tons an hour of material passing through this device, and it cycles. And we've got 32 of them in this plant. They're very critical pieces of equipment. They're big. They're operating in a bad environment, and they're highly stressed. That ring that you can see, that brown disc, is a bolted structure, spinning at high speed, very heavy, and in a very bad environment. So really critical piece of equipment, highly stressed, really important to the plant's performance. And we've got 32. We've got a lot of them. Next slide, please. So this is one of these pieces of equipment after it failed. So on the 20th of March last year, it was a Saturday around 11 a.m. here in Victoria. This machine had a catastrophic failure, a failure that had never been seen in this type of machine around the world. And it resulted, you can see the side of the machine ripped out in that yellow box, and debris was spread over a very large debris field, and a degree of luck. If this had been during the week with people doing maintenance work and so on, we may well have had a fatality or multiple fatalities, definitely a lot of injuries, because the debris went into a fairly high traffic area as well. So this was the scene I was faced with on that Saturday afternoon, when you have one of 32 machines has actually come apart in a very spectacular manner. The photograph doesn't do it justice. One of the challenges is, of course, we've got 31 others of these things operating in this plant at the same time. So you're faced with some really critical issues when you have an issue like this. Next slide, please. So one of the things, so we won't get into the details of this particular failure, but we've had a significant plant failure that put the operation of the plant at risk, put our people at risk. The regulators were involved. The investigation took 8 months, cost over $1 million Australian dollars, and major investigation using a whole heap of experts from around the world. Just to close that out, we did find the cause of the failure in the end, which was really an amazing journey, and we're about to complete rectifying that across our plant. However, in the journey of the investigation, which I led, the incident investigation, one of the things we had a quick look at was, what does our asset management system say about this piece of plant? So we interviewed the people in the maintenance department, we interviewed the operating people, we went and looked at the asset management system and so on. And this is where we found the disconnect. We found that the asset management system, so if we went and looked at the SAMP, we looked at the life maintenance plans, we looked at all of this, they looked very good, but they clearly were not reflecting the reality that was existing out in the plant. And when we talked to the maintenance team, it was interesting that they'd been concerned about some of the features of this particular piece of plant for some time. And that wasn't reflected in the life management plans, life maintenance plans. So their concerns, their knowledge wasn't being leveraged. We had some great plans. They met the strategic objective, but tactically they failed. Next slide, please. So that's when asset management hasn't delivered us the result. The strategy for that plant was thrown in total jeopardy because we had a plant that was unsafe, and we had to do something about that. Now, one of the critical ways of doing that, yes, we had an investigation. We've gone out and we've done a lot of engineering and a lot of work on that plant. But we needed a system that prevented this happening elsewhere. We needed a system that allowed us to get back in control of the plant so that we could deliver on our strategy. And that's the power of asset management. So you might say, well, why show us a failure of asset management? That's the low end. What's now driving the change is asset management, and we're recovering from this. Next slide, please. So now you'll see injected into our system a thing called a strategy on a page, a SOAP. And this is a tool that was developed over many years, used at Gladstone, used in other places, where we set out to, clean sheet of paper, understand the plant out there. It doesn't matter what the plant is, whether it's, locomotives on a railway or pumping stations in a water system or a thermal power plant or anything in between. So we start with a clean sheet of paper. We select a section of the plant driven by some process. We look at process flows and interconnectivities and risk, and we look at all of this work goes on behind the scene. And then we set up a series of workshops which engage people right through the business, from the executive suite down to the cleaner in many instances, because people right across the business have experience and knowledge and thoughts and so on. And this is about making it real. This is about engaging with them. There's two sides to this. One is we get that information, we get that knowledge, we build upon that. But two is we're empowering them to then go back out and put in place the changes that we determined together we need to do. So they become our advocates, they become the doers, they become people who make the change. So it's a really powerful item. And we've just run, I think we're up to 32 workshops in this particular plant. We've just completed the last one on Monday, where we've gone out and we've examined the plant from one end to the other in 32 workshops, where we've looked at all of these things, the risks, the performance, what's known, what's potentially to go wrong, all of these kinds of things right across the asset management spectrum. And now we pull those together in a strategy on a page, which will be a key tool in driving what we do at the tactical level, but will drive up into those things such as the SAMP and our portfolio asset management. So how we bring all of those different plants together. Next slide, please. So critical to this is that level of engagement. And you can see some photos from various workshops where we've been running, engaging with people using tools like process safety and bow tie diagrams and a whole array of tools to leverage the knowledge and understanding in a structured manner so that we can pull this together. And that's starting to be reflected in the use of things like visual management. You can see an example there where a whole array of pieces of plant have been made very visible, and the whole, this is in a maintenance workshop, this set of boards, and the whole team stands around this and has input, and everybody knows what's going on. They're feeding back into this. This is live and dynamic, just in time kind of understanding of the plant condition and what we're doing. And these are the kinds of tools that we bring to play in revitalizing this particular plant. And as you can see, there's a heading up there, asset refresh. So that's what we're doing. We're refreshing our knowledge of our asset. We're refreshing our approach to that asset, and we're refreshing our management of that asset. So it's a management asset refresh. Next slide, please. And these workshops, this is as soon as we've got a workshop, within 24 hours, we have a communication. We put out the notes from the workshop right across the operation, so people can see what's going on. They can have input, and we start to rank the findings from the workshop. We start to do risk workshops. We start to go out and fix things that need to be fixed at that reaction level, so that people get feedback that they're having an effect. And then we start to build up to feeding up into those higher level documents of the asset management system. Next slide, please. And this is a classic example. This is a real example. So a part of the plant, there's been a tradition of leaks, and the practice developed of putting patches on those leaks. And when this was raised in one of the workshops, we said, why are we doing this? Why don't we take a completely different approach? Let's go and look at the data and see how many times we've been to some of these areas. And this was a really bad case where we found we'd been 17 times to patch leaks. And we said, this is the wrong kind of strategy. We need to be replacing whole sections of worn plant. And within 1 week, we had totally changed the approach to maintaining these items of plant. No more patching. Now we go in and work out where the worst parts are, design and build replacement components and put those in. And that is a strategy that developed out of the SOAP. People had really not been cognizant of how many times people were going in and putting patches into leaking areas of the plant. So these are the kinds of things I'm talking about when I'm talking about making it real, really changing what we're doing out there so that our plant is performing better. We're not shutting it down to repair a leak. We're going out there, it performs better, it's safer, people get much more satisfaction. And so we start to build on that. Next slide, please. So part of the tools we use the DMAIC, and I presume most people will be familiar with that, which is really an outcome of plan, do, check, act kind of thinking. So we're out to define what we're talking about. We want data, and that was spoken about earlier, having good data, understanding that data, analysing it. Just having the data is no good. You've got to analyse it and say, what's it telling us? Where are we going? So you've got to analyse. And then we looked at how do we improve? Then how do we control that? And this is the power of asset management and coming back and refreshing this. Again, it's a marathon. It's just not a 5-minute project. And then we go through the loop again. So that's the critical mindset that we need. It's long-term, and we've got to go through that loop to make value out of it. Next slide, please. So there are all of the elements, but the critical one in the green box is the doing. We've got to get out there and change things. We've got to make things real by doing it. So our people see results, our bottom line sees results, our plants are safer, more reliable, able to cope more with what's happening. That's the doing element, but it's got to be in a structured and controlled manner, and that's where asset management strength comes. Next slide, please. So I come back to this. In our case, we want to manage the machines. We do not want the machines managing us. Next slide, please. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Glenn, for that great presentation. Actually, from my perspective and from the number of questions come in, I think you've touched a couple of key points, and I want to start the discussion by talking about a couple of those key points, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, Mark asks, and I'll read the question verbatim. I really like the empowerment and innovation from your employees. Was Lean or Six Sigma available as tools for plant employees to use in demonstrating value and efficiency? So this is a bit more about the detail of how you did things.
Yeah. So no, in the business, it's not a Six Sigma business, and those tools weren't obvious. Clearly underlying this is lean thinking. But one of the things that I, again, have learned is that I've been through a number of Six Sigma programs and we have not succeeded. And that was because we got hung up on all the methodologies, but the terminology and, sending people off to learn to be brown belts and black belts and all the rest of it. And we didn't bring the whole workforce with us. So we had a program that head office thought was really great, and we're a Six Sigma company and so on. And we just didn't get the results. And when you don't get the results, you've got to stand back and say, what are we doing that's wrong? So I'm a strong believer in a lot of the underlying philosophies and methodologies, but I don't dress it in Six Sigma. I don't even very much use Lean, even though these are lean processes. So for example, our approach to our workshops uses Kaizen. So I'm passionate about Kaizen. but I don't go out and stand in the maintenance workshops and say, we're going to do a Kaizen workshop. There's no need to. I understand the philosophy, and when you take people through the philosophy behind it, they get it. They don't need to have all of the theoretical stuff. So we don't use overt Six Sigma, Lean, Kaizen, whatever, but we use the principles, and the parts of those approaches, they all come from Deming. We can go back to Deming and read the original stuff. It's that philosophical, and how you transfer that philosophical view about continuous improvement into what you do. So I keep it very, very basic, but take the philosophy and use that in a manner that people right through the organization can understand. I've found in talking to boards with Six Sigma programs that many times they might have been passionate about Six Sigma, but they really didn't understand the underlying. And so right through the organization, there becomes a disconnect. So keeping it real is important.
In one of another question from Ian Rohn talks about culture. You mentioned empower. I think you used the word empower at least twice in your presentation about empowering your team. So it seems to me, and from your presentation too, and Ian as well, that changing the asset management culture, or changing the culture, I'll take the adjective out, changing the culture in the plant is an enormously important part of the process going forward.
Yes, Peter, and I kind of alluded to the Gladstone experience, which you're familiar with. One of the things I found amazing, and I said it became empowering to me. I became empowered by our people and what they did. It was an interesting situation that, I set out to empower them. And in the end, I found they were empowering me to make better decisions and to create a better environment for them to achieve. And it was a massive learning, Gladstone, because, in the beginning, I would have never thought it was going to have a profound effect on my thinking and my actions, but it did. So that cultural change element, again, terminology that is often much overused, but it really is how we all work together, how we get that ownership, how we strive to make our businesses, our plants, a better place to work, perform better, achieve what needs to happen, and do it in a manner that we all grow along the way. And when that's real, again, to use that term real, people get that message. You don't need to stand up and lecture people. Go out and do it, and they soon understand that, in my experience.
Yeah, one of my personal comments in relation to empowerment is one of the keys to empowerment is trust. And one of the things you alluded to all the time, I think, very frequently throughout the presentation, and certainly in the Gladstone case, the word trust comes to mind, where the Gladstone probably was an instance where one of the only solutions was to trust the team to come up with some of the answers. So it may well be, from that point of view, a bit of a learning curve for all of us.
Yeah, I mean, when I was appointed at Gladstone, there was a view that by the owners of that business, because it was in dire straits, was that they needed to bring in a whole new set of external parties to fix the plant. And so I went there on day one with this background of, we're going to bring all these different organizations in to help fix the plant, and very quickly realized that we had the people, with the knowledge. They knew the plant, they knew the issues. And when you went and asked a few questions, they also knew a lot of the solutions. So your point about trust is really, really important. And that's a bit of a challenge if you're the leader of a business or the head of a plant, and you're sitting in the exec office and people are looking to you to make the decisions. And I come back to your point about trust. One of the really challenging things is to let go.
Yes.
So if you can create an environment where you can say, no, I don't have all the answers, we will find the answers together. As the executive in charge, that's a very challenging position, because you're saying, I don't have all the answers. I need your help. We need each other. And many people well, in Gladstone's case, took a view that, hang on, you're not doing what we asked you to do. Well, really, let's have a look at what the results might be, because me telling you how to fix the plant really is only going to give us a minute amount of the learnings and understanding that we need to actually get the best result. So leveraging off our people requires that trust, but it requires a lot of willingness to let go. We've all had long careers. We've got to the tops of our organizations. We feel like we should be in control, and people are looking for that for us. And there are times you need to do it, but letting go is really a major leap of faith.
You had mentioned a couple of examples of employees who had come up with solutions. What were some of those?
Well, it was actually one of the employees in that example, Mike, with the patches. I actually attended that workshop. Unfortunately, I haven't got to many of them, but I attended that workshop, and this, he's a tradesman. He works on the tools, as we say in Australia. And he was frustrated. He'd been back to this particular example, and that's why I've used it, because he quoted that example. He said, I'm sick of going there and putting another patch on. He said, he was basically saying, I think this is crazy. I don't feel any fulfillment. We're not improving. It's getting worse. And so I said, well, okay, I'm an engineer. I could jump to a solution. I said, what do you think we should do? He said, stop putting patches on. Let's put new sections of ductwork in. Now, this is not rocket science. It's not, you don't need a PhD in engineering here. And that's simple. He gave us the solution. I'd get there, but in this case, he gave the solution. And why don't we go and do it? And as I said, within 1 week, you saw the change. In 1 week, that team, once they were allowed to take that idea and go forward with it, they went and did it.
And then
that's great. I think actually that ties into a question that Lucas has asked. How do you maintain the interest in asset management when some just write up a plan and leave it filed in SharePoint?
Yeah, and that's the problem, and that's why I'm talking about being real, Lucas. That I see this time and time again, and we did it. As I said, I've been through this 7 times, and when I go back to those beginnings we had in the mid-90s, that's what we did. We had magnificent asset management plans in beautiful binders on my office bookshelf. Really great. We really did it. Made no change to our people, made no change to our plant, but we thought we had a good system. And we had a system, and it was pretty robust, but it didn't deliver the result. So you've asked the key thing. As I said, it's a marathon. It's how do you keep it going? How do you refresh it? I believe in power plants, and it's different in different areas, that you need to come back to this every year. So the tool to do that for us is what we're calling the SOAP, strategy on a page. This was the Gladstone development. We said we need to be going through the continuous improvement cycle. And how do we do that? So the first year of running these workshops is very clunky, is very challenging, is hard work, takes a lot of time and effort, a lot of commitment. But what we found at Gladstone was, and we thought after doing 1 year of this and then starting to turn the plant around, we'd made a world of difference. That was nothing compared to year 2, because when we came back to year 2's strategies on a page at Gladstone, our workshops were oversubscribed. Everybody wanted to come and join them. And the reason they wanted to come and join them is those that had been involved in the process in the first year saw something change. Their world changed. The plant changed. We did things that they had raised. Now, there are things that people raised that we couldn't do or weren't the right thing to do, and we communicated that back, again, to use that earlier discussion about communication. So if it's something we can't do, we can't afford to do that, communicate that back. But what we can do, let's go and do it. And that was the most powerful driver. And year 2 workshops at Gladstone were just amazing because people had seen a change and they wanted to be part of it and they wanted to have their say and drive that. So that was, again, another learning that if you start to get this right, it starts to self-generate. Now, clearly, you've got to be guiding and supporting and looking how you improve the process and how we get better results and so on. But that annual refresh at Gladstone, and then we did it in a couple of other businesses as well, just proved to be very powerful and became very self-sustaining.
Sally,
Yeah. It's
over to you, Sally. No.
okay. Thanks. I just wondered, because I imagine, Glenn, your time will be short, although I see there's another question. I was going to sort of turn around and say, can you make asset management real, in your opinion, without empowering people?
In my experience, in those 7 attempts, no. And I think if you try to do this, by the classic way of having those lovely plans on the exec's shelf, you do an injustice to asset management, because leveraging our people makes this one of the most powerful tools. They're the ones that come up with the ideas. They're the ones that do the doing. I've just been astounded by what I've seen people do, and sometimes in difficult circumstances. And the results, Gladstone speaks for itself. It's not a theoretical exercise. Gladstone speaks to itself, and there have been some others since Gladstone. I haven't included them because we need to keep this brief. But and we're learning that right now with this process we're going through. These workshops that we've just done, these 32 workshops, have been amazing. I've only got to 3. But I come away from them, frankly, I'm the latter part of my career. I come away from them just full of excitement, because I learned so much by sitting there. Now, people see me, I'm head of engineering. I've, very senior in my profession in this country and so on. But I go to those workshops and I learn, and I find that really exciting. And I see people achieve things, and I see how excited they get when they know they're never going to go back and put a patch on that duct again, because I raised it in the workshop. I was involved in the design of what goes in there. I was involved in putting it in there. I've made a difference. And we all feel valued in life when we can contribute and make a difference. So this is really fundamental people issues. In my view, asset management really isn't around the machine. Asset management is about people.
Glenn, before we go on to another question, can I ask what you see as the difference between PAS 55 and ISO 55000?
What I've seen, Mike, is really probably how we've approached the application. ISO 55000 grew out of the PAS background, but by its nature, it's an international standard. And we went through this learning curve. I was in manufacturing for a number of years, and we went through this learning curve around quality systems. What I've found with ISO 55000 is how it's applied. And that is, people are regressing back to those beautiful plans that sit on the shelf effectively. So we're regressing, whereas PAS 55 had driven us to be much more pragmatic and applied. So, it was much more grounded. I mean, if you look at the structure, even of the document, diagrams. So if you go out and you speak in a workshop, where you've got tradesmen, you've got journeymen and so on. If you go out there and you had a copy of ISO 55000, it's a wordy document. ISO standards they're written for engineers by engineers, in my experience, in many cases. But I can go out and do a presentation about asset management and today use diagrams out of PAS 55, and people get that. So the person sitting there in the meal room getting some discussion with me, and I've got a slide that shows some of the material of PAS 55, which I use regularly when I get a chance. They understand it. Oh, okay, so it's a closed loop. Oh, I see, I get that. And so, you know, it's just the whole structure of it allows it to be applied much more easily.
Thank you
ISO
very much.
55,000.
Thank you.
I must thank you for the opportunity to come and have a discussion this morning. I do have to leave. I have to go to the daily operational meeting. So I do need to kind of close off fairly shortly. If anybody's got any other questions through Sally, I'm always more than happy to. As you might detect, I'm somewhat passionate about asset management. I know my thinking is different to many of my colleagues. A bit of a maverick, but 7 times through this, and please go and read the case study in the book. That's a good book to read about making asset management real. So thank you very much, Mike, and the team in the US. Appreciate the opportunity to come and talk with all the good folks.
Well,
Thank
thank
you very
you.
much,
And thank you, Sally and Peter, for partnering with us in this very informative series, and look forward to more in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks a lot, Shuey, for that. That was great. It's always good to hear maverick points of view because I think you learn a lot.
Well, I'll tell my boss that in about an hour's time when we're meeting for a review. So I'll quote you there, Sally, because I'm sure I'm from time to time in a bit of a annoyance. Thank you very much. Goodbye, folks. Have a great evening in the US, and we'll talk later. Bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. And thank you to our audience for attending and paying attention through this program.